Welcome to our podcast, Not Exactly As We Expected, with me, Christine Capassi, and my husband, Sam Hendrickson.
We have a blended family with 6 kids and 2 dogs, and I've spent our careers in education.
We talk honestly about unexpected things that make up the life we have, even though it might not be the life we thought we'd planned.
We'll share stories and talk to inspiring people who have also lived through some of life's unexpected moments.
Our hope is together we can normalize the experience of being human and more ourselves, with fun along the way. Hello and welcome to Not Exactly As We Expected, the show that explores the twists and turns of life, including how to navigate the complexity of blindness. I'm Christine, and down the hall in our very own home is my husband, Sam. In today's episode, we will discuss how to support caregivers who are supporting visually impaired people, such as in my experience with my husband, Sam. Be sure to listen all the way through our episode for details on supports and resources that might help your family and your very important visually impaired person. And now, off we go with our show, Not Exactly As We Expected.
Well, I'll start out of the gate by saying I'm a lucky guy. And I'm lucky for, not because I'm blind. That's not a very fortunate thing to have happen to anybody. But I'm particularly lucky because when I lost my vision, I had somebody in my life to do a variety of things that I could not do for myself. When one loses vision suddenly, like I did, and then I guess in some cases even progressively, it's difficult to navigate your world. So the small things become big things. Things like having lunches made for you and labeled, and so that you can in a designated spot, so that when your loved ones leave you and you're all alone in the home, you can eat. And then bigger things like bills and finances and getting disability arrangements and Social Security figured out. And then even bigger things like coordinating doctor's appointments, going for tests, taking time off from their jobs, and managing and balancing their workplace to help support you. I was lucky. I am lucky because I have a tremendous partner in my wife, Christine. Not just because, but it's really who she is, too. It's not that just she shows up, but she's bright, she's resourceful. I was just on the heels of her getting her doctorate degree, and so she was an ace researcher. In the midst of all this, she even created a website. I think she thinks in terms of websites and Excel sheets anyway.
I do.
Which is another podcast for another time.
I do. I think in terms of websites and Google Slides.
Yep. So for the 2% of our audience, that is, our geek factor just went through the roof. Just kidding, honey. Just kidding. Anyway,
proud of it.
She thinks that way, and so created resources for other people. But she's caring, she's loving, she's empathetic, and she's a big cheerleader for me.
Thanks, honey.
You're welcome. You're welcome. But I'm not just saying it for the sake of the podcast. I am lucky. Not everybody is like me. Other people who have vision loss don't have a significant other. And that could be for whatever reason. Oftentimes, we don't really talk within the blind community about those people who support us, who are there in the day by day and in the trenches with us. So wanted to talk a little bit about that, kind of exploit a topic that really needs to be brought to the surface within this community, and perhaps maybe will inspire other communities as well. Christine, I don't know if you remember, but I could barely stand myself in the beginning when I lost my vision. I was moping and doping around the house. It was hard to find my way, literally, figuratively, spiritually. Everything was on the table in terms of just what my life meant, what it was to be, what it was, the stuff I was missing. I could barely stand being around myself. How did you do it? How did you tolerate me in those days?
You know, anytime that there's been such a traumatic experience in life, such as this, I don't know, we just were grieving. We cried. I think you and I spent a lot of time. I mean, it happened so suddenly. One day we had our sight, the next day we were blind. And I say we because, it felt like it happened to me, even though the blindness didn't happen to me. Our whole world had turned upside down. And I think we gave ourselves the space to cry. And it just felt like we had to go moment by moment. Do you remember that in all of that sadness, and there was a lot of tears for both of us and our kids, we started our silly seconds?
I do. I was going to mention that. I'm glad you beat me to it. Christine coined the term silly seconds because as I began navigating the sighted world as a blind person, I would make a lot of mistakes. And one thing I did in my sighted life that I just was convinced I was going to do it no matter what, hell or high water. I make Christine coffee every morning, and I wanted to continue that. I didn't want that to end just because I lost my vision, but it was really difficult at first. And we've told this story a number of times, but at that point, Christine was drinking her drinking her coffee with almond milk, and the almond milk container is shaped and feels just like the chicken broth container. I think the two companies use the same packaging company. Anyway, you probably are figuring out what happened. So one day I'm making her coffee, I bring it up to her, and wish I could have seen the expression on her face, but I heard it, like she spit it out, was like, ugh, what the hell is this? And I had poured chicken broth in the coffee and mixed it all and delivered it to her. And I don't know if that was the silly second moment, that was the original silly second moment, but out of other moments like that, me coming down, toothpaste on my face still, or hair product in my hair, making it look weird.
Caked in your hair.
Caked in my hair, not really spread well, because, I don't see my reflection at all in the mirror. I don't know what I look like. And wearing clothes not the right way, mismatching.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
those were the days my closet really wasn't organized for a blind person. So silly seconds, I think, helped. Laughing was sort of a healing thing that got us through so much. Christine, what was it like inside your feelings in the beginning? I mean, I described mine, and it was hard for me to stand myself, but what was it like being inside of you, inside your feelings during that time?
I think for any significant loss, and this is this really did rock our worlds, and it continues to, but in those moments you can't see, especially that first year, anytime anyone experiences grief. I think that very first year, when all of the newness is still in your face all the time, it's sometimes, for me anyway, it was a matter of, some days it was just, I'm going to get through the next 5 minutes, because that was as much as I could do. And then other days I could get, I would say to myself, I'm just going to get through this next hour. I can remember like stories. I can't remember exactly how I felt, except this overwhelming grief. I felt both grief and such love that I was grateful that you were still here and we were experiencing the sadness. But I had some, I had a lot of worried thoughts, but I knew that you were here and we were going to make it through. I just didn't know what the other side of all of this was going to look like. I mean, do you remember going to your graduation? My graduation, when you were only blind for about 2 weeks, maybe a little more. It's hard to remember time at this point, but you were only blind for about a month, and we had to figure out how to navigate, how to get to the ceremony. We picked up the kids on the way because the kids didn't know yet. And as a mom, okay, so let me back up a second. Why didn't the kids know? The kids didn't know because Sam and I are remarried, and our kids were visiting their other parents, at that time when Sam became blind, it's just a wild, wild thing. So we had like 2 weeks to figure out how we were going to deal with it before we picked up our kids. And we processed it. It's like unimaginable to process it as a couple. And then when you're about to pick up your 6 kids for a graduation, you have to figure out a way when they get in the car to say, this thing has happened. We debated back and forth. Do you remember debating, like, should we tell them now,
Yeah.
on our way, now before we go get them in 2 weeks? Should we just get them now? And ultimately, we decided that we didn't want them to carry the weight of it without actually seeing their dad. We wanted them to see you and touch you and know that you were okay, even though you were blind. We didn't want to call them and say, hey, by the way, this happened, and we hope you're okay with it. It was like really an impossible decision. Looking back on that, do you think that we should have handled it a little differently, knowing what we know now, Sam? Like
No.
picking them up and telling them?
Well, I think the big thing, as you said, is we wanted them to be with us as they processed. It wasn't like drop it, tell them the news and then send them off somewhere else. We wanted to be together
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that they could
it's
ask
true.
questions, so they could process it, so that, they knew even though my sight was gone, I was still going to be here, be
Dad.
their dad. And I remember it
Yeah.
was particularly difficult because our autistic guy, Liam, you know, blindness is difficult, I think, for other people to accept, but to explain it. Like, I can remember Liam's first response, well, why don't you just go to the eye doctor? Why don't you get new glasses? Why can't the
Mm-hmm.
doctor fix your eyes? Like, he comes from this place where that doctors can fix everything. And he didn't understand. He just didn't understand. And I had to say, my eyes are broken and they can't be fixed. I remember
So
that.
Liam, as I remember, was at camp,
That's right.
and we picked him up from his camp. He had a sleepaway camp, and when we picked him up, you know, even now people say to Sam that he doesn't look blind, and I don't think he's alone in the blind community with that comment that this person doesn't look blind. And that was true. That's still true. Even today, I look at my husband and I forget that he can't see me or others, and so forth. But when we have a disabled son who it cognitively can't cross the street on his own, even though he's 23 years old. At the time, he was what, 20, Sam? St. Liam was about 20
Yeah,
when
about
this
20.
happened.
Yeah,
Um, we
19.
were like, how do we help him conceptualize blindness? And so we came up with saying to Liam, Dad's eyes are broken.
Hmm.
And because he understands the concept of something breaking and not working again. But he must have repeated that at least 20 times a day.
Yeah.
But Dad, your eyes are broken. But, and then he'd pause. He said, but Dad, but your eyes can no longer see. And then he might, test it out and then forget, walk away and come back and see his dad just sort of feeling around, and then it would remind him and he'd say, but Dad, your eyes aren't broken, and the conversation would start again. 3 years later, we remind him, but it's just part of life, right, Sam? Wouldn't you say that when we see Liam, he's not so present to that conceptual idea, he kind of gets it? Or do
I
you
think
think
he's,
he's
yeah, I think on his terms he's accepted it. But I think, I don't know, I think his only frame of reference might have been like Three Blind Mice back then. Like a cartoon on his age level, like of what blindness looks like. Like there's, and I think to some extent, to what you were saying earlier, I don't look blind. I think when if people had to describe what a blind person looks like, they'd probably say, well, cane, glasses, everybody has sunglasses on. And there's a variety of reasons why some blind people wear glasses. And, um, like not everybody's eyes are cloudy and with loss of pigment
mm-hmm,
or loss
mm-hmm.
of muscular control. So their eyes aren't, that's only if specific to certain eye diseases. I have perfect muscular control. I can move my eyes different ways, and my iris and pigment hasn't changed. It's just, but anyway,
Yeah,
I think that was harder for him to conceptualize because I didn't look blind. But if you
yeah.
really watch me closely, you see I bump into things or I
Well, you didn't
struggle.
have your cane, and I remember.
Yeah.
So this is, we're talking about being the caregiver. I hadn't fully, and I still go to this not so much anymore, but I hadn't fully conceptualized it myself. And here's one example of that. We are driving home from picking up Liam, who's learning for the first time that you're blind, And I'm trying to be efficient and multitask because that's just part of my DNA. And I'm like, let's just stop at the grocery store. Remember, Liam needs a lot of guidance and a lot of support. And now Sam has no cane yet. He's so newly blind that he has no independence beyond like holding on my arm to get around. So picture that. It's me, it's Liam, and it's Sam, and we're at the grocery store. And I get a cart, and I'm standing there, and I'm like, oh boy, okay, Sam, how about you hold on to this side of the cart? And Liam, how about you hold on to this side of the cart? And off we went. And so I thought, gosh, this is just not going to work. This is just not going to work. At one point, I said to Liam, take your dad over to the apples because I needed a second to figure out the next game plan. I was like, oh boy, this was just a bad idea. And I mentioned this that I had to walk away and think because at that point I wasn't able yet to be like brutally honest with you that it was really hard for me to watch your lack of independence. It was the first time that I didn't know what to do about it. It was one thing to be sad that you lost your vision, but here I was in a grocery store where we had been 100 times before, and you didn't have independence at all. I mean, our child with autistic needs was helping to support you, which was beautiful. At the same time, I was standing in this like Twilight Zone moment thinking, oh my gosh, what is my life? I point this out because I rewind 3 years later and now have such a different experience as your partner because your independence has grown exponentially. But in that moment, it was nothing short of like jarring, terrifying, humbling. I cried. I thought, oh my gosh, this is just never gonna get any better. When we're that kind of sad, it feels like, the end of the world at times. Well, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but I couldn't see my way out to another way of being in the world. Like, had you asked me then if I would be taping a podcast with you today, I wouldn't have imagined that was even a possibility in the scope of things.
Yeah. Christina, I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but I think it's important to do it. Talk a little, what is life like? How is your experience different? Because, so let me give you an example. Like let's say I can feel and hear how you're different, but I that's just my perception of what's going on for you. What is it like for you now that you have a blind husband? Let's say we're going and we're exploring a new town. Like, I think you have a sense of obligation as I think you've become, whether you like it or not, a resident narrator. You narrate what's going on. You're my eyes as well, so that you're sensitive and you're generous, and that you account for what my experience of a new town is like, or a new restaurant, or you describe what people are seeing. But what's that like for you to have to do that? What does that feel like?
Well, you're kind of setting it up when you say have to. It kind of feels like a horrible obligation, and like that might be the intonation. And I know you
Yeah.
probably don't mean that. It is. It's very different, and I just think I'm sharing with you what's really weird about this experience is that you and I kind of experienced it at the same time together, and we are learning on the ground as it goes. So in that way, I feel very partnered to you in figuring this out. And in other ways, I feel that our experiences are incredibly different. So how does it feel to be in a new town and you not seeing it is harder for me a lot of the time than me narrating it. So, what do I mean by that? Today, you said to me, it's like this. Today, you said to me, we were cooking dinner or preparing something. I forget what we were doing. We were joking around like we normally do. And you looked at me and you said to me, "Are you smiling? What's the expression on your face?" And it just makes my heart cry when you say that, because it's like this reminder that you can't see my expressions. Like every bride dreams her groom is going to be at the end of the aisle adoring her looks. And, every wife, I don't want to speak for every, but this wife really used to enjoy your ability to just take a look at me and flirt with me with your eyes. And all of it has changed. The imagining of feeling your love with your heart is exceptional. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't still sad that you can't see me. I don't like to admit that to you because I know it makes you sad too. I'm grateful that we can have these, talk like this. But it also is like that when you say I'm narrating the streets, that's like, for me, it in one way feels like the least I can do. But when I'm
Right.
describing a sunset to you, I'm thinking to myself, well, shit, this is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
We're in London and I'm describing what it looks like. What must this be like for my husband who's never been to this town? For me to like do the best I can and stumble over the descriptions of things. And yes, after the fifth day of vacation, I'm a little tired of the descriptions of
That's right. I
everything.
know.
That does happen. I'm not gonna lie, but it's humbling. It's humbling to help someone and to love someone so much that you want to be their eyes. In so much as it can be, like it can be a beautiful experience and really, really hard all at once. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful to have this opportunity still to be able to support you whenever I can.
It
What's
makes
it
me.
like for you to? I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. Don't. What you're gonna say?
What's it like for you to be in those moments where you can't see something that you used to see, like an expression?
It's very hard. Um, I took for granted how much I relied on vision as a source of communication. You have listening, you have speaking. So, for example, I could show if our neighbors are listening to this, I mean, absolutely no offense. You did nothing wrong. But we were invited down for a holiday party 4 doors down at our neighbor's house, right? And everybody is there. They're arriving and they're mingling in the kitchen in like a big family room. They're getting drinks, there's hors d'oeuvres, and there's like a buffet, a line, right? I can't go through that line. It'll be an absolute mess. I will knock something over, especially if there's like high things like candles or place settings. Like I just know better not to do that. So Christine has to kind of navigate that and figure out what I like. It's hard because there might be something there that I've never tried that looks appetizing. Well, just let it go. Can't do that so much. But mingling is really challenging. I miss being able to see people's expressions. I have kind of just naturally, without knowing it, gravitated to a group of people standing and I'm listening. I can hear other groups talking and I'm like, I can't make eye contact, so I don't know what conversation I'm really participating in. So I tend to just back out and participate in neither and rather take like a neutral spot and wait for somebody to come and talk to me. That's the sort of my
Yeah,
strategy.
and
And a lot of blind people are that way.
yeah,
It's hard to know. So
and
that
it's
I
hard.
miss.
It's hard in that situation to know what my role is. So, for
Yeah.
example, I know I'm not supposed, like, it's never been our experience that I'm following you around. Like, what wife would follow her husband around from room to room to room at a party? Like, that's not our experience of each other. We usually like divide and talk to people, and we find people interesting. We love to be at these things. And then we didn't even talk about it the first time because who knew, right? You would
I
walk
don't know.
into a
Yeah.
place, like, we didn't know we were going to experience. And as your caregiver, your spouse, I don't know what my role is suddenly because we didn't talk about it. For example, you walk into a room, I don't know 70% of the people, and like suddenly my job is like figuring out everybody's name, letting people like who are around you know that you're there. Or if I leave the room, I let you know to go get food, or I come back, or I leave the room to leave you alone with other people in there. I know that sounds like kind of weird that I
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
leave you alone in a room, but when your spouse is visually impaired or blind and you're showing up at a party together, it's not like you went to the theater together. If you leave your spouse in a room and you say, okay, I'll see you in a little while, I'm going to go talk to so and so in the other room. We have learned and talked about this since, but at that point, I was like the next to your side like glue. And we got home from that party, I was like, gosh, we really didn't think that through at all, did we?
Hmm. Yeah. And there's some benefit to hanging with a blind person at a party. Like, for
Yes,
example,
there is.
like I can remember, I think we were at a funeral and there was like people, I forget who was with us, but somebody was with us. And it's like, oh my God, I don't remember like any of these people. I don't remember their names. I'm like, just stand by me. I ask everybody what their name is because I can't recognize their voice. And then when they say it, the rest is on you,
That
but
is that is a side
yeah,
that's a
so
side
there's
benefit.
a little side hustle there. Like, I'll just go up and ask people their name. I can't see them, but so there's that piece. Yeah.
Who knew? We learned the hard way that that you can be in the middle of a sentence at a party and somebody suddenly there's nobody in the room and you had no idea people were leaving.
Yeah. I've been, yeah. Yes.
I
I
didn't
have
know because I
been,
wasn't in the room with you, but you know how
right.
groups of people will gather and they'll be together and they'll talk, and then you're kind of peripherally just saying hey or joining the conversation with your eyes or something.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have your field of vision as a context clue, people decide as a group to leave, but they don't say it out loud, and you're just carrying on.
Yeah. I can
People
remember.
have left the room, and I come out. I'm like, so you're by yourself? You're like, am I? Because I was just chatting it up with apparently myself.
I remember one time, I think it was like Thanksgiving. We were in I was in the family room and there was people on the couch. I was in a chair and I was talking. And then you came up, you put your arm around me and you're like, there's no one here. Like I thought there was people there that I was talking to. No one knows to tell a blind person that, because they assume that people, it's a sighted world, that the social rules are really geared for
It's
people
super
with
different.
sight. So, and they just get up and leave a conversation. They, like, I don't know that you left unless you say something,
So where does that leave the people in your life? What would be? I mean, have you thought about that at all? Like, where would that leave us? What could we do? Not just me, but the people in your life. We could pass out cards at a party and tell them how to be. Be like, hi, if you're not going to be chatting with me anymore, if you wouldn't mind letting me know, that would be super helpful. I'm
Well, this
being
brings
super
up,
kidding here, but what would you do? What would that look like?
well, this brings up kind of thing I wanted to talk about too. And I'll bring that up at just a moment. Like, well, I'll actually say it now. Let me say it now. And, for our blind listeners, hang with me here, because you don't leave the podcast after this first sentence. Blindness is probably, at least in my experience, this is the world according to this blind person, Sam. Blindness is a very selfish condition, disease. It is extremely selfish. What I mean by that, so hang in there. I'm going to explain what I mean by it. When you lose your vision, it's understandably so that people the attention gets focused on you and what you're not able to do. All the services pour in for you and what you're not able to do. And it becomes a very self thing. And you describe the world and the people around you as instantly not being able to understand what you need. And you have to learn how to articulate what you need to the world and how they need to explain it to you. And there's oftentimes a frustration. Like, so for example, if you eavesdropped in on blind people having conversations with other blind people, one of the common things you hear is, especially of their spouses or their partners, is something like, I don't get why he or she doesn't know how to talk to me. They'll say things like, it's over there, or they expect you to, realize something. Or they'll say, like, they want to do things like enjoy parts of their life that are sighted or sight dependent. Like, I want to go to a movie. Well, where somebody mentions, like, a bunch of people are over, like, hey, let's go to a movie, or let's go to a museum. And people getting mad because nobody made, like, a concession for the blind person in the room or something. And I've always said this, I had to kind of realize that I am the first blind person I've ever known personally. Prior to me losing my vision, I knew celebrities, and that's how I understood the world of blindness. And it's very different from celebrities with lots of resources to the common blind person. But I also had this realization that for you, Christine, and for people like Christine, it's their first blind person that they know or related to, love, and are trying to help. And they're not always going to get it right either. It's hard for them too. So if you naturally say, hey, honey, can you get me the spoon? It's right over there. What that requires of you, what I'm thinking, Christine, what's you're going through your head is like, if I need to tell Sam that it's to his right, he has to reach for it, feel for the counter first. Like, you have to be so descriptive. It doesn't come out naturally. And then you have to invert it, right? So if you're looking across a counter from me, my right is your left, and so there's this concession. There's this, like, patience you need to have. Anyway, I do think blindness is very selfish in so many ways.
Well, and rightly so for, the blind
Understandably.
individual, right? Who's got to have a very different level of awareness in order to just be safe and live life every day.
Right.
But
Well,
that's not what you mean.
that's not what I mean. One of the things I had to learn, and you said it, you alluded to it earlier in this conversation, is blindness. You said blindness didn't just happen to me. It happened to my wife. It happened to my children. It happened to my family. Their lives have been impacted by me not seeing in very practical ways. Like, you lost the driver in the house. You lost the shopper. You lost somebody that can do some household chores, fix things. And, you know, so those practical things, but you also lost somebody that has the ability to look at you and say that you look pretty, or notice that you have something new that you're wearing today. And that's something a husband and wife partners do with one another. I know I have assistive technology. I have some usable vision, so I'm still able to do that. It's not the same. But I often don't, I think, ask you enough. And I've been in groups with friends that are blind and said, when was the last time you asked your wife how she's doing with blindness? That's what I mean, that it's a very self-absorbed thing. You'll hear blind people say, how come she doesn't know how to talk to me? Or how come she suggested that we go sightseeing or see a movie? That's so insensitive. It's like, well, they have lives too. And you shouldn't feel guilty about wanting to see a movie or going to a museum just because I lost my vision, right? So I'm talking a lot here, but that's what I really wanted to say. Like, it's a very self-absorbed thing, and we often forget about the other people that it's affecting. And so that's what really this is about for you.
Do you remember when I planned a trip, an outing for our family to go? It wasn't the Spirit of New York. It was some yacht. We live near in a metropolitan area in New York City, and I planned, just some Groupon where we went to see the lights of New York City. We
Yes.
took our guide dog. We took the children that are still home and not out at college, and we came home. It was a delightful day. It was rigorous, very busy day, night, the whole thing. But I still remember looking back at you during that night cruise around the harbor, and it was dark, not a good thing for a blind person. It was on unsteady ground, not a good thing for most people, not to mention people who have visual impairments. We have a dog with us. I could go on. And, I thought to myself, gosh, this was probably not my best idea to take Sam on this. And at the same time, I was like, damn, this was a great idea. I wanted to do this.
Yeah.
I really wanted to do this. And I want to have a good time, and the kids count. And I don't always know, like, how to navigate all of that. And, you came home and you were like, I'm never going to go on a sightseeing cruise at night. Anything, you said to me, anything that has the two words sight and seeing, count me out.
Yeah,
And
I
I
lost my
thought,
shit. I really did.
I thought, okay, he's being super clear here, but as a care partner, as your spouse, where does that leave me? Where
Yep.
does it leave the sighted people in your life? Are we, you know, where does that leave our marriage and the things we used to do and the
Yeah.
things we used to like? We have to talk about it. And like, since this is so new for us all the time, we don't always know, because we used to do this stuff in your sighted life and enjoy it like crazy. And
Yeah.
we went through it this time, and we have to think it through, like set our minds to it in a very different way. So I approach these kinds of planning differently now. I'd be like,
Yeah.
are you sure this is what you want to do? Because I will go and I will take the kids without you or with you, and we figure it out. We also had that same kind of experience. I could go on and on and on with a museum. I
Yeah, I
mean,
remember that.
how can I begin to tell our listeners what it is like to explain an abstract piece of art, piece after piece after piece, before you just want to lose your mind? I remember saying to Evka, we had her as a guest on our show, and she came with us that day. I looked at her, I was exhausted. I pointed to Jackson Pollock, and I said to her, maybe you can explain this. I'm just out of words. But underneath that all is this sadness. I just, not only can you not see it, and that makes me sad, but here is yet another thing that we have to rethink from our former lives to our new lives. So
Yeah.
museums are out of the question, but I'm sure we'll discover a please touch museum or something else that we can enjoy. But it's these bumps in the roads we hit. We go, oh, that wasn't such a good idea, and we figure it out.
I haven't encountered anything like especially for blind people. It's more of there are occasionally places where you go where there are accommodations specifically for blind people. So, for example, we went to Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway, and Christine had, the researcher that she is, checked ahead of time, and they had audio description, like a little Walkman kind of thing, and
Our
direction.
listeners, our listeners aren't going to know what a Walkman
Oh
is. They're
boy, yeah,
very, very young listeners.
I'm dating myself. So our listeners, that was a mobile kind of device about the size of like 6 iPhones that we thought was great. And you put a little cassette player and you'd listen to music or the radio with it. And it was called a Walkman. Anyway, that might be in a museum somewhere. I'm sure.
But you
Uh,
listened to it so that you knew what was
yeah.
happening, what the theater looked like, what the show was,
And they would
right?
explain where the actors were doing, what they were wearing.
And
And
who was
then,
coming on and off stage, right?
yeah, and it was just all that kind of directive stuff, very descriptive. And then when the actors were delivering lines, it was perfectly in sync. The tape went quiet, and you would listen to the actors. So that was kind of a cool thing. Um,
Well, so
uh,
what about when you go to? How do you enjoy a new place if you can't see it?
well, I was getting back to like what we were saying about museums
Oh, right.
and all that kind of stuff. And in respective of the other people in our lives. And my message is I'm borrowing this from a very old Saturday Night Live skit. Al Franken had a character. It was like a therapist, and there was this line. And it's a great line, and it really applies here. It's easier to buy slippers than to carpet the world. And I'm thinking of that line specifically here because the world will never be a place exclusively for blind people. It's not going to be a place exclusively for anybody. You have to find your slippers. And I have slowly realized that it's an inside job that I need to do to be able to show up for the people that matter to me in my life and stuff that's important to them that they want to do with me. I can't pull this, well, I'm blind and you're insensitive. I have to be able to show up. That's what I mean by blindness has this kind of unique grasp on people if you allow it to, where it could be so self-centering. Like it's so easy to say, well, you're so insensitive. I can't see. How could I possibly enjoy that? Well, it's
Mm.
about the other people enjoying it with you, and you need to show up. Like, I'll be honest, our daughter was the star of the play in the fall. I would have paid lots and lots of money to have sight for the 3 hours she was on stage. I would have bargained with God or whomever and made that deal. But that was impossible. And I could have pulled the selfish card and said, well, I don't enjoy it. I needed to show up for her. And me being present and just being there, she knowing that I was there, and being able to hug her at the end of the performance and say, I heard every word and you were great. You were that character. You were so good. You made me believe you were her and I didn't even see you.
And
Stuff like
that
that.
really matters to all of us, that you still participate in life. And we've adjusted as a family too to um, we all want to do things that you enjoy as well. We don't,
Yeah.
we know that you're willing to go to a museum on occasion or a movie on occasion, and we're grateful for that. But we look for activities we can enjoy more, like we really, really enjoy together. For
Yeah.
example, concerts. We
Yes.
can see live music together, and we can still move to the music, go to small venues or large venues. We like to enjoy new restaurants and new locations.
Mm-hmm.
Sam's mastered eating out, which was an easy feat at first, to eat in dark places, and we discussed that in our first episode.
Mm-hmm.
We like to visit small towns and go shopping. And shopping is a whole nother episode. How do blind people shop when they can't see? And we'll go into that a little bit, especially the a whole episode about shopping with Grandpa. That was that was fun.
That was fun.
He was a real
Yeah.
trooper. But trying to figure out how to do life in the way that you can now that you're blind, and as a caregiver, how to enjoy it in a whole new way. And I'm not going to lie, I'm going to really emphasize this. Really just saying that it's important to say to yourself, I can enjoy things without Sam. That's just how it can be sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't want to give up going to a movie. I don't want to give up going to an art museum. I want to enjoy all of the pieces of my life that I used to enjoy. It's just really different, and sometimes it still makes me sad that we can't enjoy those things together, but
Yep.
we figure it out.
And that it's my responsibility to deal with my feelings about it. It's irresponsible for me to put that off on the people that I love that are around me. It's an inside job that I need to be vocal about, like, look, I'm having a moment right now. I am really missing my vision. And there's sometimes where I get like narration saturated, like where I can remember a time we're out with friends and everybody was just narrating everything. And I was starting to really get inside my head with, I really miss not being able to see right now. And I'm getting better at it where I need to just say to people, you don't have to describe everything right now. I just need a minute. Just treat me like I have vision. You don't have to, I just want to be real with people. Don't treat me like a blind person for the moment. I don't want to know any more about what I'm missing, that kind of thing. And that's on me. I have to do that kind of stuff. It's not fair to put it on our caregivers. And that's what I mean by a lot of the time this is a very selfish thing. But speaking of selfish, oh, go ahead. Were you going to say something,
Well,
Christine?
I was just going to say to wrap up our episode that if you really think about the themes that we've covered here, it's really honoring your perspective, taking into consideration whether you're the person you've both been affected by blindness, whether it's the individual that it happened to, such as yourself, Sam, or the other individual that it happened to, such as me. It's really about taking good care of yourself
Mm-hmm.
and not expecting your partner to do your emotional work for you. You
Right.
have to take care of yourself and find a way to support yourself mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. You have to make dedicated effort to do that, because if you look to each other for everything when you're both struggling, it does not make it easier. It makes it much, much harder.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned the words wrapping up, but before you do, I need to say this, okay? So we need to let this go
Okay.
just a little longer. You
All
mentioned
right. What's
about
that?
self-care and finding support and things like that. One thing
Oh,
that I found remarkable, this is actually a remarkable fact. You know, here we are in the year 2023, and Christine, when I found a support group that I participate in, I have a couple that I do. I was able to facilitate and volunteer for a support group. I have one for men, and I have a few others that I work with. But when Christine asked this question, well, is there a support group for the spouses or partners of the blind people? Where do I go to find a community of people who are walking a very similar walk as I am? And there was nothing available. And not just nothing in New Jersey, there was nothing that we could find anywhere.
yeah,
I,
there's
I
nothing
find
in the country.
I find that just absolutely remarkable. And but what I find even more remarkable is that a person who needed to be a participant, that needed the 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 community, when there wasn't one, she created one. And my dear wife, brilliant Dr. Christine, created a
All right
support
now.
group, probably the first one in the existence of the United States. I don't know. It is certainly the first one in New Jersey that had its inaugural meeting last week and will continue. But it is the first ever support group for spouses or partners of those that are blind. And Christine, I wanted to kind of just throw some light your
Thank you.
way,
Thank
give
you.
you
Thank
the
you.
stage for a minute, and talk about like what that was like to not to like hear crickets when you were asking for that kind of help, and then the idea to kind of like, oh well, damn it, I'm going to do it myself.
Well, so here we have one, and it didn't exist, and we have one, and it's just great to be in the company of others who are walking the same path. That's what I can say about that. We're just beginning, and we are from all over the country, and we all have two things in common. The first is that our partners are all visually impaired, and the second is none of us could find a support group for it. So we'll let you know how it goes, and it's perfect timing that you brought it up because we said we would put resources at the end of the show, and I will add this to it. We began our first support group, and we hope to have others who not only want to participate, but are willing to facilitate so we can reach more and more people like us in the country who would like the support. So thanks for putting that out there, Sam. And thank you to our listeners who showed up today for this important episode focused on the journey of caregiving as well as being a part of a couple for these unexpected journeys we have in life. And for us, it just happens to be blindness. Thanks again for showing up for our episode on Not Exactly As We Expected. Don't forget to like us on your favorite podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for listening to Not Exactly As We Expected.
Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by liking us on Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.